Tonight's shiur is called Neck and Neck. Interesting name. Kabbalistic insights to the significance of the hanging of Haman, and conversely, the desire of Haman to hang Mordechai. So each one is at each other's throat, each one wants each other's neck. Of course, we know the end of the story, Baruch Hashem. Thank God that the neck of Haman was hung and not the neck of Mordechai was hung. However, it seems to be that there's an inner battle playing behind the general story of Purim. The general story of Purim, very briefly, is that King Ahasuerus became king. He made a great celebration, a feast. Everyone was invited to the feast. Everybody came to the feast, including some Jewish people who came to the feast as well. And there is a dispute whether what exactly was the sin of the involvement of the Jewish people there. According to the Megillah, it seems that Kirtzon Ish Va'ish, that the Seudah was conducted, the meal, the celebration of Ahasuerus was conducted according to the will of each man, and each man, the Gemara says, Ish Ve'ish, according to the dictates of Haman and his wishes, and Ish Ve'ish, Ish, the other Ish, Mordechai, Ish Yehudi, which is also referred to as an Ish, as the will of the people of Mordechai. So therefore, what was the issue over here? So we will discuss in a minute. And if it was all kosher food and all of that stuff. So what was the issue? And very briefly, the story goes on that Haman rose to great power, till he became the second in command, the highest, other than the king himself. He ordered everybody to bow down. But behind the scenes was already playing a decree against the Jewish people. And Haman plotted to destroy all of the Jewish people, minar v'zaken, taf and ashim, whether it is a child, whether it is an elderly person, babies, women, wanted to annihilate them all. We've seen that throughout history. Unfortunately, this level of anti-Semitism, which is prevalent. But there must have been something behind it. What suddenly allowed or caused Haman with such vengeance to want to destroy all of the Jewish nation? At that point in time, why this point in time? Not yesterday, not tomorrow. So we know that everything happens by divine decree. Everybody has free choice, of course. Everybody must take responsibility for their actions. But as we mentioned on previous occasions, the history of the Jewish people is miraculous, both for good and both for bad. The Jewish people are blessed to be like the stars and like the dust. They can rise up to the highest of levels, or God forbid be brought down to the lowest of levels. Like we see later on, when we see the downfall of Haman, he's coming to complain to his wife that Mordechai now is ascended to the good graces of the king, and he is on the king's horse, and he had to escort the horse like a slave. Vashti told him, "Im zera Yodim." If he's really truly from the seed of the Jewish people, lo tuchal ki nafol tipol lefanav, you will surely fall before him. Why is that? Because when one rises, one falls. When the Jewish people are behaving like light, when they are reflective of God's light, they're like the stars. Nobody can touch them. They want to, they don't want to, the scheme, plot, nobody can touch them. But when they are allowing themselves to be physically and spiritually be trodden upon, when they don't stand up for who they are, what they are, God's chosen people, then indeed they will be trodden upon. And then Haman is up on top. So the nature of the Jewish people is miraculous, both for good and both for bad. I mean, the going-ons throughout history, the negative occurrences, the Jewish people, is absurd. It's not within the realm of normalcy. Neither is the great miracles that the Jewish people continually experience, and equally the very existence of the Jewish people, their success, their place in history, their influence of society. Every generation throughout history, they've impacted and influenced the world. It's absurd. It's not normal. It's beyond human rationale. But besides what's going on with the decree against a venomous leader, an anti-Semite against the Jewish people, there is this tension that's going on behind the scenes, an inner battle and struggle that's going on behind the scenes between Haman and Mordechai. And as I said before, Haman is not only trying to destroy the Jewish people, but he wants the throat, he wants the neck of Mordechai. And he erects a very, very tall tree. ותאמר לו זרש אשתו וכל אוהביו ויעשו עץ גבוה 50 אמה. ובבוקר אמור למלך ויתלו את מרדכי לעץ. ובא אל המלך שמח ויטב הדבר בעיני המן. She advises him, make a tall tree, hang him there. Go in the morning, tell the king that you want to hang him, and then all your worries will be over. The very sight of Mordechai irks him, disturbs him. He can't handle. He's just came out of the king, and he was invited. He's invited to the royal banquet. Who was invited to this royal banquet? None other than the king, the queen, and who? Haman. Not only is the king, not only is Haman in the good graces of the king, he's even in the good graces of the queen. Now, queens in Persia have good reason to be suspicious of Haman. He doesn't treat queens very well. Like with Vashti. He's the one that instigated the killing of Vashti. He's the one that advised the king, get rid of her. And the king did. Yet, he's invited to a royal banquet. Nobody else. No other dignitaries. No other ministers. No other advisors. Only Haman and the king. He comes out. He's so happy. וכראות המן את מרדכי ולא קם ולא זע ממנו וימלא המן על מרדכי חמס ויתאפק המן. He's very angry. He comes out, he's all happy because he's just been invited. His ego, his head just blew up now another couple of notches. His ego is like really gone through the sky. And then what is he? The first person he sees when he goes out? Mordechai. It's like someone's poking him in the eye. Can't handle it. What's your problem? You decreed anyway, with the king, that you're going to annihilate all the Jews. A little bit of patience, they're all going to go anyway. What's your problem? What is this tension that you're having with Mordechai? What do you have to get rid of him now for? What is he, like a thorn in your back? Because truly there's a spiritual battle going on between the leader of the Jewish people, Mordechai, and the leader and the representative of Amalek, which is Haman. There's a spiritual battle going on besides the physical battle that's going on. So desperate is Haman to get rid of, wants to hang Mordechai, and immediately that he goes against the advice of his own wife, which was very wise. She tells him, in the morning, prepare a big tree. In the morning, go to the king and tell him and hang him. The reason why he prepares a big tree, there's a few reasons, but one of the reasons the Mefarshim, the commentary says, is because that day you're invited to the meal with the King Ahasuerus and Queen Esther. You'll be able from the distance to see, whilst you're enjoying the good food and the good drink and the wine, and the tequila, they drank tequila there, no? Or they drank arak. Arak asli. You'll be able to see him from a distance. He'll get such nahat, such joy. He's sitting there in the palace, and there he can see his arch enemy, both physical and spiritual, hanging there. He doesn't listen to the advice of his wife. And when does he go? Something absurd. Absurd. The Haggadah says, "Balaylahu nadada shnat hamelech vayomer lehavi." The king couldn't sleep. What does it mean he couldn't sleep? That means he was already in his nightie. He was wearing his, what do you call it? You know, the thing with a pom-pom on top? Nightcap. He was wearing his hoodie on already. He was in bed and he was trying to sleep. And he had his chamomile tea and that wasn't working. And he had his warm milk and that wasn't working. And he was tossing and turning. And in fact, the sages tell us he already had a dream. So which means he was asleep. He had a dream. God put it in his head that Haman wants to assassinate him. That's what he saw in the dream. Now, he's already in sleep, he's already in bed. Does a king accept people, visitors, when he's in bed, when he's asleep? Who comes? It's ridiculous. When does Haman come and tell him about the plan? So desperate, so benafsho, so much it's within his very soul to get rid of Mordechai, that he does something that is totally unacceptable and absurd in the etiquette of the palace. He knows what the rules are in the palace. He knows what the etiquette is. I mean, you know, you're friendly with Ahasuerus, but don't push your luck. He's wearing his nightie and his East jersey. He doesn't want anybody to see that he goes for Easts, especially when they lost the Souths the night before. And he's pushing his friendship. What's this? No, who's over here? He says, Haman is here. What's Haman doing here? And he's coming to tell him about one thing. What is it? What is it that he's coming to tell him? Is it a national disaster? Is there floods? Is there bushfires going on in the kingdom? What's going on? He wants to tell him one thing. Look, I prepared a big tree and I want to hang Mordechai on it. So crucial is this. This is not just something that, I'll get rid of, my enemy, or it's benafsho, it's bedamo. It's within his very core. Mordechai represents the very antithesis of who he is. And he seeks to destroy him, to kill him in a particular manner. Why waste time? He's the prime minister. Why waste time? Go and chop his head off. And if you're so eager, do it now yourself. And if you need to tell the king, because that is the rules and the regulations, then you wait, and the next day you chop his head off, or whatever the case may be. Why hang him? And what did Hashem do? Turned everything around, and he himself was hung. Why did the king have to hang him? If the king deems him as a threat, could have killed him. Vayomer Harbona, the Harbona, one of the advisors of the king, tells him, Ineh Ha'etz, Asher Echin Haman, LeMordechai, Omed Gavoa Hamishim Amah, he's the tree that Haman prepared for Mordechai, who spoke good about you. Mordechai, who saved you from Biktana Vateresh. There's the tree. Vayomer HaMelech Teluh Alav. The king says, hang him on the tree. Vayitlu et Haman. V'hamat HaMelech shachacha. And the wrath of the king has subsided, has somewhat forgotten. Oh, I got rid of him. I always thought that he was a bit of a threat, a bit of a nuisance. He's a bit, got a bit of a big ego trip. He's too ambitious. Why wait? Takes time to go and hang a tree. And maybe the noose didn't work. Who knows what happened? Why didn't he just order Harbona off with his head? Whatever it is. Stab him, put him in jail, put him in a pit. Hang him. So there's something going on here behind the scenes, in addition to the decree against the Jewish people. Similarly, we see later on in the Megillah that in Shushan, 500 people were killed, as well as the 10 sons of Haman. And Esther makes a request of the king, please, can you make sure that the 10 sons of Haman are hung? And the king does so. So this hanging, the 10 sons of Haman, the ones that advised the king not to go ahead with the rebuilding of the second temple. They got their just deserts, but they got it in a manner, the same manner as Haman did, the very same manner that Haman plotted to get rid of Mordechai. Then, we have another interesting concept, a theme that seems to emerge as well in the Megillah. Things are surrounded around the meal. Now, last year we gave a very interesting shiur in regards to the meal and the drink, and we related it and connected it to Yosef and the brothers and the meal and the drink that they had then in Egypt, and how it was beautifully connected. It's on the internet, you can listen to it. But again, in a different manner that we will discuss and highlight this year, again, I want to point out that the whole miracle of Purim and the decree of Purim is surrounded around a meal. How so? Well, let's see. Mordechai makes a big feast. Hashverosh makes a big feast. The Jewish people, or some of the Jewish people, partake in that feast. The Talmud says that the reason why there was a decree upon the Jewish people was because because they enjoyed, they relished the meal of that wicked person, of that wicked king. So it wasn't an issue of kashrut. There was no issue of kashrut. It was fully kosher-cated. It had the best rabbinical authorities. The wine was imported straight from the Golan Heights, the best wines in Israel, with the best rabbinical ashgaha, with the best rabbinical supervision. The problem, the Talmud says, is that they enjoyed the meal. And that brought about the decree. And it's interesting to note that the decree was not instituted immediately, allowing the people to err and perhaps justify their actions and think they did nothing wrong. The Almighty firstly is patient, allows us an opportunity to repent, but He also allows us the opportunity to err and to justify our actions, saying, no, what's the connection? It's got no connection. I understand. If I ate at the meal and I choked on a bone, and we all choked on a bone, there's a message here. But a couple of years later, suddenly Haman gets up, got nothing to do with us. In fact, there were those that says, got nothing to do with us. Mordechai says, you went to the meal. You are beginning to go and feel that you must blend the society. And predominantly the problem was that there was the halting of the building of the second temple. And people began to feel that maybe there is no hope. Maybe we're never going to go back to our land. Maybe the second temple will not be rebuilt. Maybe the prophet's prophecy will not be realized. And they began to lose hope, and we gave a shiur about that as well, which is not the time to elaborate, but how can you enjoy the meal? How can you enjoy the meal, especially since the king took out items from the temple? The king took out the 8 clothing of the high priest. He's taking out the clothing of the high priest, items from the temple, a reminder that the temple is desolate, is destroyed, and we're enjoying the meal. How can you enjoy the meal? And I want to remind you of a story that I said before, but it's a very powerful story with a very powerful lesson. And I'll say it briefly because we've said it before on other occasions, but some of you have not heard it. And even if you have heard it, it's worthwhile to remind us. The holy Maggid of Mizrich would eat very little. And they asked him one time, why does the Rebbe eat so little? Why does the master eat so little? And he said, I'll tell you a story. There was one time a very wealthy, honorable and distinguished Jew who was extremely charitable and kind. And he only had one daughter. And this one daughter became engaged. And there was going to be a very great lavish meal and wedding, and he invited everybody, especially the poor. He invited all the poor people from all the province, sent invitations everywhere. And indeed the affair was very big and lavish, and the poor people weren't sitting in the back, they sat in the middle, honorable position. He really honored poor people, he honored everyone. And all of a sudden, whilst the food was being served on the tables, beautiful, succulent food that these poor people never seen before, and have an opportunity to firstly still their hunger, but aside from that, taste beautiful, succulent food that they've never tasted before. Suddenly there was a very, very painful announcement that the daughter of this benevolent and kind man died. And there was a dispute amongst the people. What do we do? Of course, everybody took this shattering news the way it should. They mourned, they cried, they were very upset. His only daughter. But when people calmed down a little bit, there was a dispute amongst the poor people. Here we are, we're poor people, we don't have what to eat. And the food is being prepared. What do we do? Some said, haram. What? The food is here, what a waste. I'm sure that our benevolent benefactor would prefer that we eat the food than we throw it away. At least some benefit. Take with us a doggy bag, it'll last us a couple of days, something. And others says, how can you eat? True, the food is there. True, we're hungry. True, we haven't tasted such delicacies. True, it's an opportunity, but how can we eat? The Holy Maggid of Mizrich said that the Almighty had a beautiful house, a home, a temple in Jerusalem. That was like his daughter. And he's our benevolent benefactor. And it was destroyed. And I'm from those who can't eat. I just can't bring myself to enjoy from this world, I can't eat. The error, the sin of the Jewish people was such that they enjoyed the meal. How can you eat? How can you eat when you know he's another stark reminder that the temple is destroyed? But perhaps even worse, as I discussed on a previous occasion, even worse is when you lose hope. When you lose hope in your own future, in your own destiny, in your own prophets that prophesies that the temple will be rebuilt after 70 years. And you lose hope. And what's the sign that they lost hope? That they enjoyed this meal that Hashverosh was celebrating, that he himself believed that the prophecy will not come true. And since I spoke about it a few years ago in a shiur, especially about this, I don't want to elaborate anymore. But I do want to say that things are surrounded around the meal. Then we have another example. That although this very meal was the cause or the catalyst of the decree against the Jewish people, was also the birth of their redemption. How so? Because after the king had a good time, he decides he's going to call Vashti and parade her in front of all of the people. She is very beautiful. Without any clothing, he's going to parade her in front of everyone. Bayom HaShivei, it says on the seventh day on purpose, because she would torment her Jewish maidservants, specifically on the Shabbat, on the seventh day, where she would order them to work on Shabbat. So God brought her downfall on Shabbat. Everything is in a measured way. Midah keneged midah. Everything corresponds beautifully. And she said no. And the king was very insulted. How dare she refuse the king? He consulted with his advisors. What is the protocol? What do we do when a woman refuses a husband? When a queen refuses a request of the king? I mean, this is the king. So Haman suggested, get rid of her. That set into motion the Yeshua, the redemption of the Jewish people. That meal too was responsible for the birth of the redemption of the Jewish people, not only the decree. You notice how at the very moment that the decree is born is the very moment that the redemption is set into motion. The potential for redemption is there. It's always there. What we always forget is that when the sun sets, the sun is still moving in a motion to rise the very next morning. And so too it's with everything, in our individual issues, in our individual problems. And also, historically. We think, wow, it's dark and the sun is set and things are bad and things are tough. What you don't realize is it's set already. Now it's really on the way up. The sun is now beginning its ascent. It's beginning the process of soon to rise. Isn't it interesting that sometimes we go to bed with a massive problem, an issue, and we don't know how to solve it, and quite often we wake up in the morning, somehow this problem is the same problem. You don't have any solution more than yesterday, but somehow you feel that you're going to get through it. The hope of a new day, the sun rising, just fills you with hope. The fact that your soul went up and came down and was rejuvenated and refreshed. And God gave you your soul again and trusted you with another day. So we can, if God trusts us, well, we can also trust Him. God trusted you this morning when He gave you back your soul. That you'll make a day out of this day. That you'll do something special. That today will be something different. Despite yesterday and the day before being, as we Israelis say, ala panim. How do you translate ala panim in English? Who? How would you say in English, ala panim? Like, terrible. God trusts us every day, despite our failures the day before. Why don't we trust Him? Trust Him, it's okay. And quite often we do. We somehow wake up with this inner trust, this ability to get through that problem that even though we have no new solution, no new brainstorm, no new idea how to overcome it. So Vashti was killed, and that set into motion the process of Esther being chosen as the queen, and then she being the catalyst of the redemption through her dedication, through her prayers, through her fasting, etc. And when was the nail on Haman's coffin finally struck? When Esther also called a meal. So we see that things are surrounded by a meal. The decree came about because of a meal, and the redemption came about because of a meal. So there is something connected to the concept of the tree, the way that Haman plotted against Mordechai, and a way against and the way Haman was himself killed, and also the concept of a meal. The sages say that there is something remarkable about these two festivals, these rabbinically ordained festivals of Purim and Hanukkah. We discussed again in a shiur the difference between Purim and Hanukkah, and I don't want to elaborate upon that and why it says that Purim will be a festival that will never be removed. Maybe if we have some time at the end, even when Mashiach comes, Purim will still be celebrated, despite that the rest of the festivals will pale in significance compared to the light and illumination and the holiness that will emanate in the times of Mashiach. But Purim will still be up there, will still be shining. So the sages say that there's something, a hidush, a novelty about Hanukkah and Purim. Something very special and very unique about them. So, just like to quote a few of them. The Imre Emet writes in the name of his teacher, Ki Hanukkah and Purim mahzikim otanu begalut. For Hanukkah and Purim hold us, strengthen us during the exile. Ki hem, and this is the hidush here, this is the novelty here. Ki hem yamim tovim biyamot ha'chol. There is a contradiction to these festivals. Ordinarily, we have Shabbat in the festival. What do we do on Shabbat? Shabbat, you're not allowed to do any mundane activities, and you're not allowed to even cook on Shabbat. Festivals, you're not allowed to do mundane activities, but you're allowed to cook. But you're not allowed to drive, you're not allowed to work, you're not allowed to this, you're not allowed to that, right? Hanukkah, is it a festival? It's a festival. Not from the Torah, albeit from the Hachamim. But they proclaimed it a festival, right? Yet, on the one hand, it has the holiness of a festival, and we celebrate it as a festival. Hanukkah, for example, we have obligations. We have mitzvot. Sukkot, you have the obligation of lulav. Rosh Hashanah, you have the obligation of shofar. Pesach, you have the obligation of matzah. Shavuot, you have the obligations of cheese blintzes. So Hanukkah, you also have its obligations. You also have the way that we celebrate the festival. It has a mitzvah, again, albeit rabbinically ordained, but it's the way that we express it, the way that we celebrate it. And that is predominantly by lighting the menorah and singing God's praises. Lehodot ulehalel. To acknowledge, to appreciate, and to praise God. And the novelty is, and Purim we also have, it's a festival. What's the festival? That we have obligations on the day. We read the Megillah, we make a lavish meal. We send gifts one to the other in order to increase our brotherhood and friendship and allow others to have what to make a meal with. We give to the poor in order to allow them also to enjoy the festival of Purim. Yet the novelty is that on the one hand we have obligations, and it has an element of holiness to it. It has obligations to it. It's a festival. It has rabbinical ordained mitzvot, obligations. Yet it's a mundane day. You can do activities. Yes, it's advisable not to work. And all of these type of things, we have to set aside time to celebrate this day properly. But notwithstanding that, we're allowed to drive. We're allowed to do mundane things. We're allowed to write. We're allowed to turn the lights on. We're allowed to write a poor person a check. On Shabbat and the festival, you can't write a poor person a check. Even though writing a check to a poor person or handing him money is a very great mitzvah. It's a very great thing. Not on the festival. Festival, you don't do mundane things. Purim and Hanukkah, you can. How is it that on the one hand it's a festival, it's a quasi-festival. On the one hand it's a festival. On the other hand it still retains its mundane concept. And this is the Hiddush, this is the novelty. And this is what strengthens us in exile. That we have the ability to, on the one hand, be in hall or in exile, and yet on the other hand, infuse it with a certain level of sanctity and of holiness. Bad bevad, simultaneously, whilst we exist in exile, we can still have a heightened perception of spirituality and godliness, even though that we are in exile. And that's what I believe, according to what the Imrei Emet writes, that what the festivals represents. This beautiful paradox. Akedat Yitzhak, he says a different thing. Hanukkah and Purim me'aidim. Hanukkah and Purim, the festival of Hanukkah and Purim, is a testimony. Ki HaKadosh Baruch Hu nimtza imahem begalutam. That the Almighty is with the Jewish people in their exile. Lehagen, magen, ve'ezra, lechol tzarotam. He is a shield and he is a helper to all of their sufferings, which means, yes, we're in exile. Yes, we've been exiled from our land, and the temple has been destroyed. But these festivals, both because of the miracles and because they've been proclaimed as a festival from year to year and have been accepted throughout Jewish history, throughout Jewish world, is an indication that God is with us at all times. And God protects us and brings about miracles for our nation the times that we need. On a similar vein, the Sfat Emet writes, Amru Rabotenu Zichronam Levracha HaKedoshim, our holy scholars of blessed memory have said, Ki Hanukkah uPurim, for Hanukkah, the festival of Hanukkah and Purim, Hem mahzikim otanu begalut, ki hem meirim betoch hachoshech. They hold us, they strengthen us, they fortify us in our exile, because they are a light in the darkness. And yes, despite the fact that we are in a spiritual darkness or slumber, there exists light. And we are able to feel that light and to see that light. I mean, miracles is an enormous light from God. It's an enormous revelation that God is there and God is there for us. And there's been wondrous miracles even in modern day history. We can all recount miracles in our own lives. There was a phenomenal miracle in the Scud War. If you recall, 200 and something Scuds landed in Israel, and not one person died, and one person died from a heart condition which was indirectly. Not one person died, and each one has a story to tell. I didn't have water, I went out to my grandmother's just to get some water, have a shower, bang. And each one in the same building has Remarkable, crazy stories. A book was written about these crazy stories. Coincidence? How many? Thousands? On a daily basis? Not one person died. Yet one Scud landed in the base of the Americans and killed, unfortunately, hundreds of troops. Hundreds. How many Scuds have landed? It's comical. How many bombs have landed in Israel? Thousands. You know what thousands is? Thousands. It's comical. I say it's comical, unfortunately, because unfortunately, the Arabs who send them say, oh, how can Israel strike us? I mean, us guys, they don't cause any damage. It's like a joke. It's even a joke to them. They send it and just lands here, lands there, lands here, lands there. It's phenomenal. So we see miracles. These miracles are indication that there is light in the darkness, and that the Almighty illuminates the darkness for us, and we can find the light if we so wish. So therefore, we no longer have the temple, but we have Hanukkah and we have Purim that are this stronghold of light, a remnants like from the temple. And soon we'll see, in a very great way, a remnant of the temple through these festivals. How so? Let's see. On Hanukkah, we have no mitzvah to have a meal. There's no mitzvah to have a meal. The Rambam writes that's a good idea to have a meal, but it's not a rabbinical mitzvah. It's not a rabbinical edict to have a meal on Hanukkah. The Rambam says that since there was a battle, it was a physical battle, so the way to express the festival of Hanukkah, or the physical dimension of it, which was through the battle, that was in itself a miracle, so it's customary to have a meal. A meal is associated with the body or the physical dimension. But that's not a rabbinical decree. The rabbinical decree is to light the Hanukkah and to praise Hashem and to say the bracha. That made miracles for our ancestors. In those days, Bazman Hazeh, at this time. Lehodot ulehalel, to acknowledge and to praise. Not a meal. Purim is a commandment to have a meal. Why is Purim different that the sages institute that you have to have a meal? Hanukkah, the sages didn't institute you have to have a meal. Why? You ever wondered why? The Rambam writes that the main dimension of the miracle of Hanukkah is spiritual. So we celebrate it in a spiritual manner, like lighting the menorah. Purim, the dimension here was the saving of the body of the Jewish people, correct? So we celebrate it through a bodily way, a bodily function meal. But it is obvious that it is much deeper than that, and that's what we're going to be investigating. But aside from that, we know that it was a spiritual battle as well. Because the decree was as a spiritual lack of sensitivity or hope or faith in the Jewish people. The whole tension between Haman and Mordechai was a spiritual one. So there is a spiritual dimension here as well. Yet the sages chose to celebrate it. We read the Megillah, but that's the whole story. We read through the whole story in order to recall and to remember. But the thing that takes center stage on Purim is the meal and the Mishloach Manot, the sending of gifts one to the other, that emphasizes the bodily aspect of it, the meal aspect of it. Why is that? The Hatam Sofer, one of the great scholars we quote quite often, he writes in the name of the Rokeach. The Rokeach is one of the early authorities from the Baalei Tosfot, from the European scholars of France and Germany, after the time of Rashi, the great scholar and commentary of the Bible and the Talmud. And he says as follows, and it's written in other places as well, that which it says in the Torah, Vayikhu shemen zayit zach, there is a commandment that the Kohanim will take pure olive oil and light the candelabra in the temple. That is a hint, a remez, that there will be a miracle for Purim, for Hanukkah. And that even if the temple is destroyed, there will still be the concept of the lighting of the candelabra. In fact, we find that God promised Aharon. Aaron saw that everybody's, has a position, has a contribution to give to the tabernacle. What's he got? So God says, hey, hayecha, shelcha gedola mishelahem, yours is greater than theirs. Why? Because you are metivu madliket hanerot. You have first rights to cleanse and to light the menorah. What's so good about that? So the sages explain to us, what's so good about that is even when the temple was destroyed, there will still be the concept of menorah. There will still be the concept of the candelabra, the miracle of Hanukkah that exists till this very day. 2,000 years almost since the destruction of the temple, since we no longer light the menorah, the candelabra in the temple. And then he says another thing. The lechem hapanim, the showbread, there was a table in the tabernacle, and on the tabernacle was 12 loaves of bread that symbolized parnasah, sustenance, that God will sustain his people, the 12 being a symbol of the 12 tribes of Israel. And that is a remez, is a hint for Purim, that will come a time that we will no longer have the showbread. We will no longer have this table with this bread. But will come a time where we will have a se'udah, a meal on a table, and that will be like equivalent, that will be like a hint to the showbread in the temple. That will be like a replacement, so to speak, a temporary replacement until God will build the third and final temple speedily in our days. This is what the Baal HaRokach says. So Hanukkah corresponds to the menorah. Purim corresponds to the table, the showbread. The showbread, parnasah, meal, etc. Okay? Interesting to note that the Gemara in Masechet Megillah speaks about the 7 advisors of the advisors of Ahasuerus. One of them is called Haman, but he's called Memuchan. And I'm not going to go through how the Gemara explains every single one of them because we don't have the time. And plus, this is the most significant because the final one is the most significant one. But the Gemara translates homiletically or finds a remez, an allegory, a hint to the word Memuchan. Each one of the names of the advisors, the malachim come along, the angels, the malachei hasharet, the holy ministering angels come before God and say, these people, these advisors that they represent their nations of the world, did they do such and such for you like your people did? Did they bring up sacrifices to you like your people did? In other words, being an attorney, being an advocate, a good advocate upon the Jewish people. The last one is Memuchan, and the Gemara says that Malachei Asharet, the ministering angels, say before God, Klum hichinu shulchan lefanecha. Did Memuchan or his nation or his ancestry prepare a table like your children did in the temple? Memuchan, shulchan, a set table, an ordered table. Did they? So we see that the final, so to speak, advocacy about from the angels before God, so to speak, that are interceding, so to speak, on behalf. The spiritual angels that we create through our own actions, through our own good deeds, come before the Almighty. And they are energy that we created. And they come before the Almighty and they say, and the last one is the showbread. Did the nations of the world prepare you a showbread, a meal, so to speak, like the Jewish nation did? So we see that there is a deep connection between the showbread and Purim. The bread in the temple and Purim. The bread in the temple corresponds, as we said before, to the meal of Purim. Here's another indication again, another connection from the Gemara. So there must be an inner connection. So we have to investigate these. These are the questions, and now we're going to analyze them through answering them. But before we do, we want to bring as an introduction, because this introduction will help us understand and answer our original question of neck and neck. The concept of Haman at Mordechai's throat, Mordechai, so to speak, at Haman's throat. The Pasuk says, Ki tisa et rosh, when you will uplift the head of the Jewish people. There it says, speaks about counting the Jewish people. Moses is commanded to count the Jewish people. But it doesn't say the word count, it says uplift. When you uplift the head of the Jewish people. Look what the sages write in Psikta Rabti. And they say as follows. Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu leMoshe. God spoke to Moshe saying, Moshe, Moses, Kol ma she'ata yachol leromem et ha'uma hazu, everything that you could possibly do to uplift this nation, romema, lift them up, uplift them. Sheki'ilu li ata romem, because it is as if to me or me that you are uplifting. Shene'emar, as it says, Ki tisa et rosh bnei Israel, for it says in the verse, when you will uplift the head of the Jewish people. Ki tisa et bnei Israel en ktiv kan. It doesn't say when you lift up the Jewish people. It says when you lift up the head of the Jewish people. What is the significance of that? Ale et rosh, lift up, so to speak, the head. What is the head? Ve'en rosh shel Israel ela HaKadosh Baruch Hu. When there is a reference to the head of the Jewish people, this refers to their head, their source, their root, the Almighty God. Shene'emar, as we find in a verse, Vayavor malacham lifnehem, there in Micha, there's a verse in Micha that says, Vayavor malacham lifnehem, the angel went before them, veHashem berosham, and God is at their head. Which means that the source, the spiritual source, the life source, the energy of the Jewish people always remains God. Like the body, the energy of the Jewish people is, the energy of a body is its head. Sever the body from the head, the body can work fine, the heart is good, fingers is good, everything is good. But sever the head, there is no longer life. Because the head is that which pumps life into the rest of the body. It dictates to the body how to do, what to do. As long as the body is connected to the head, there is life. As it says, "V'atem advekim b'Hashem Elokechem hayim kulchem hayom." You cleave to the Almighty God. Hayim kulchem hayom. You are alive today. When we cleave to the Almighty, this is the essence of all life. And that is considered our head, our source, our very essence. God forbid sever that, and we sever our very life source. Just as the body cannot live if it's severed from the head, so too spiritually, God forbid. So what part joins the head to the body? Come on, you all know it. The neck. The neck joins the body to the head. It's interesting to note that quite often Shlomo HaMelech and many other verses, you'll find it in Tehillim, you'll find it in many places, there's something very special about the neck. it's slaughtered quite often. It's what's the word I'm looking for? What is it? Huh? No, not referred to. It's we said a shabeah in English. It's like not praise, but it's like it's expressed quite often. Its beauty. It's like something. There's something very beautiful about the neck. Maybe this is why in certain cultures they put all of those things in the neck. Do they do it to lengthen the neck? By the way, I'm just asking. Do they? They actually lengthen the neck. You see, so there is something to it. The bigger the neck, there's something beauty to it. There is something very unique spiritually to the neck. We find this quite often in Tanakh, in the Bible. And as I said, we find it in Shlomo HaMelech. We find it in Proverbs a lot. We find it in Tehillim. Something about the neck. We find it in Shir HaShirim. Something about the neck. There's a spiritual component to the neck, because the neck is that which joins, it's the bridge that joins the head and the body. And now we are now setting the stage of understanding what exactly is going on between Haman and Mordechai. Mordechai, Haman, the head represents the essence, the core, the life source of the Jewish people. The body represents the Jewish people. What does the neck represent? What does the neck represent? And the neck, that is that which joins the head and the body. There's a great symbol here. In the neck, there are two most important faculties in the neck that bring us life. Who knows what they are? The kaneh and the veshet. They are the windpipe. I never know how to, the proper medical term for it, the trachea or whatever. I never get it right, never pronounce it right. Trachea, that's the one. It's a tricky one, trachea. And the food pipe, what's that one? Huh? But you don't know that one. You just know food. You forget about the rest. What? The esophagus. Thank you. That was the one. That I know. Esophagus I know how to pronounce. Connected to food, I know how to pronounce it. Two most important. Why they're most important? One brings us food. One brings us oxygen. Life, the essence of life, is through these two, through the neck, through these two. One you bring in, food, and you bring out. You express yourself without words, without the ability to speak. You're missing a lot. It's interesting to note that when we slaughter an animal, and we must slaughter an animal if we are to eat it, we're not allowed to eat an animal if we do not slaughter it. The halakha says that you must slaughter the majority of those two, the esophagus and the tricky one, the trachea. Trachea? The trachea. Because that's the essence of the life of the animal. You sever its connection between the head and the body. You salt the blood, which we discussed previous occasions, ki adam hu nefesh, as a respect to the animal. You remove its life source. And you eat just its external part, just its flesh. And you do it in the most humane way possible. All this business that we hear in the news, that they want to ban slaughtering. I was in the slaughterhouse. I saw this, the stunning, and how they what do you call it, in the brain, and how they miss, and how they're careless, and how you're telling me how careful the shohet is, and how he and as I said before, how sharp the knife is and how smooth the knife is. I cut my own finger with a knife. I learned shita. I cut my own finger. I didn't feel the cut at all. I felt the pain later on, but not the cut at all. You're going to tell me that this is the most humane possible way to be able to slaughter the animal. But it's interesting that we must slaughter the animal no other way. We can't do it through another way. We can't stick something in its brain and numb it, or whatever the case may be. You have to slaughter those two parts, because that's life. That's what joins the body and soul together. There's something very special about these two. Similarly, the Talmud says, and we'll end with this, and next week we'll have the sequel, because that's very important, so you better come next week. Similarly as well, the Talmud says in Zvahim that Kol hazoveach yitzro, anybody who slaughters his animal soul, his evil inclination. It uses the expression slaughters. Why slaughter? Because he who, just like when you slaughter those two aspects, the esophagus and the trachea, the windpipe and the food pipe. So too, the animal within us, if we are to slaughter it, so to speak, we have to take into our own control the esophagus and the trachea, the place that we breathe and we talk and we express ourselves, and how we talk and what we say, and also the eating, what we eat and how we eat. We will stop here. Now we're beginning to understand that there is a relationship now, a very deep relationship with the neck, and maybe this is what was happening with Haman, that he wanted to strangle the trachea and the esophagus of Mordechai. We will discover that next week.